De envelop arriveerde op een donderdag, gleed door de brievenbus van Rosa van der Veens sociale huurwoning in Amsterdam-Noord, met die karakteristieke fluistering van papier tegen metaal, een geluid dat normaal onopvallend was, maar dat op deze specifieke ochtend iets in haar bewustzijn activeerde, niet alarm precies, maar een soort verhoogde alertheid die voortkwam uit het herkennen van handschrift op de voorkant, die specifieke kalligrafische stijl die professioneel was, maar niet persoonlijk, die communiceerde dat dit geen casual correspondentie was, maar iets formeel. Iets dat gewicht droeg dat verder ging dan het fysieke gewicht van het papier zelf. Rosa bevond zich in haar kleine keuken, 3 bij 4 meter, met keukenkastjes die origineel waren uit de jaren 80 en die ze had geschilderd wit om de ruimte lichter te maken, met een raam dat uitzicht bood op een binnenplaats waar kinderen speelden en waar wasgoed hing tussen balkons als vlaggen van domesticiteit toen ze het geluid hoorde. Ze droogde haar handen aan een theedoek die versleten was maar schoon, liep naar de deur waar de envelop lag op de mat, bukte zich om die op te pakken met beweging die economisch was, die sprak van een lichaam dat was getraind door jaren van praktisch werk, van tillen en arrangeren en construeren van dingen met haar handen. Het handschrift was niet van Victor. Dat zou te persoonlijk zijn geweest. Zou hebben gesuggereerd dat hij tijd had geïnvesteerd in dit gebaar, maar was duidelijk professioneel, was product van calligrapher, die was ingehuurd om uitnodigingen te produceren, die elegantie communiceerden, die social status signaleerden door pure esthetiek van hun presentatie. Rosa kende die wereld, had ooit in die wereld geleefd tijdens de 6 jaar dat ze getrouwd was geweest met Victor de Ruiter, projectontwikkelaar wiens bedrijf transformeerde industriële gebouwen tot luxe lofts voor mensen wiens wealth was recent genoeg dat ze nog voelde de need om die te demonstreren door hun woonkeuzes. Ze opende de envelop langzaam, niet uit ceremonie, maar uit voorzichtigheid, uit gewoonte van iemand die had geleerd dat verwachtingen vaak gevaarlijker waren dan realiteit, dat anticipatie meer schade kon aanrichten dan actualiteit. Binnen was kaart die zwaar was, textured, met embossed lettering dat traditioneel was in zijn fontkeuze, maar modern in zijn layout. Victor de Ruiter en Isabel Vermeulen nodigen u uit om getuige te zijn van hun huwelijk. Rosa las de details, datum, locatie, een landgoed in Laren natuurlijk, omdat Victors nieuwe leven vereiste settings die photographed well, die vertelde verhalen van succes die zijn audience wilde consumeren. Dresscode, black tie, wat betekende dat expense was expected, was part van de performance. Maar wat haar aandacht vastpakte, was niet de informatie zelf, maar de implicatie van haar inclusion in guestlist. De vraag van waarom Victor zou willen dat zij aanwezig was bij moment dat was, supposed om te celebreren zijn nieuwe beginning. Zijn movement forward van hun shared past tot future, waarin zij theoretically irrelevant was. Ze bevond zich nu zittend aan haar kleine eettafel, 2-persoons, hout dat niet antiek was, maar ook niet Ikea, iets tussenin, functioneel maar dragend karakter door years van gebruik, en keek naar de uitnodiging met expressie dat was onleesbaar zelfs voor haar eigen bewustzijn, was mix van emoties te complex om te untanglen in moment, maar die cumulatively voelde als iets tussen sadness en iets dat harder was, dat meer leek op recognition van pattern, van understanding, dat Victor's gesture was, niet uitnodiging maar statement, was not inclusion maar performance van exclusion, was designed om te demonstrate gap tussen waar hij nu was en waar zij was gebleven. Rosa was 41, met gezicht dat droeg evidence van leven, dat was not easy, maar dat ook was not without its satisfactions, its moments van meaning dat compenseerde voor material limitations, dat defined haar daily existence. Haar haar was donker met grijze strengen, die ze niet probeerde te verbergen omdat verbergen required resources, tijd, geld, energie, dat ze alloceerde naar dingen die meer essential waren. Haar kleding was simpel, spijkerbroek en sweater die comfortable waren, die clean waren maar die clearly waren not designer, die communicated dat fashion voor haar was utility in plaats van identity, was covering in plaats van statement. Ze werkte in bloematelier De Tuin, small shop in Oost, waarin ze arrangeerde bloemen voor events en voor daily customers, die wilde gifts of decoration dat waren living, dat carried symbolism, dat was ancient maar ook immediate, dat connected people tot nature en tot each other door language van color en form en fragrance. Het werk paid minimum wage, offered no benefits, was precarious in manner dat was typical voor service economy, waarin flexibility was euphemism voor instability, waarin independence was code for absence van protection. Maar werk was also something that Rosa genuinely loved, dat connected haar tot tradition van craft, tot proces van creating beauty dat was ephemeral maar real, dat existed briefly maar intensely, that brought joy to people in moments that were significant. Births, deaths, celebrations, condolences. Alle moments waarin humans needed rituals om te mark transitions that were too large for words alone. Na werk, na betaling van huur en utilities en groceries, Rosa had approximately €100 per maand for everything else. Kleding, transportation beyond haar fiets, any emergency that inevitably arose, omdat life was series van small crises that required solutions that usually involved money. She had no savings, had no assets beyond furniture that was second-hand en enkele boeks dat waren precious, niet door monetary value, maar door what they represented. Gifts van mensen die had mattered, evidence van life that had included education, culture, aspirations that extended beyond mere survival. Victor had left haar 6 jaar geleden, had informed haar via lawyer that marriage was ending, dat division van assets zou favor hem omdat business was zijn, because wealth that had been accumulated during their marriage was product van his labor, his vision, his risk-taking, whereas her contributions, emotional support, household management, all invisible labor that enabled his focus on career, were not quantifiable in manner that legal system recognized. She had received small settlement that had sustained her for maybe 2 years' tidings, which she had trained as florist, had rebuilt life that was smaller in material terms, but that was also in some ways larger, was more aligned met values, that she had carried, maar had compromised during marriage wherein Victor's ambitions had dominated, had defined trajectory van their shared existence. And now, I wanted her present at his wedding, wanted her to witness his new life, his new love, his demonstration that he had moved forward, had found happiness that was apparently more authentic than whatever they had shared, was more photogenic, more aligned met narrative that his social circle valued, that his audience expected. Rosa plaatste de uitnodiging op tafel, stared at it for a long moment. She could refuse, could ignore invitation, could maintain dignity door absence, door refusing to participate in spectacle that was clearly designed to humiliate her, to position her as cautionary tale, as evidence van Victor's growth that required her diminishment as contrast. Maar there was also different possibility. Possibility that involved niet refusal maar reframing, niet absence maar presence that was on her terms rather than his, that refused role van victim that he had scripted for her, that claimed space in his celebration not as supplicant maar as equal, as person whose worth was not defined by material circumstances, maar by something more fundamental, more enduring. Ze stood, walked to a small desk, while she kept limited correspondence, extracted paper on pen. Her hands moved across page met certainty that surprised her, producing words that were simple maar definitive. Ik zal er zijn. No elaboration, no emotion, just confirmation that carried its own weight, its own dignity, its own refusal to play role that Victor had imagined for her. She addressed envelope, affixed stamp, carried it downstairs to postbox on corner. Release van letter felt like crossing threshold, like committing tot action, whose consequences she couldn't fully predict, maar that she recognized as necessary, as step toward liberation van shadow that Victor's judgment had cast over her life for 6 years since their divorce. Walking back to her apartment, Rosa felt each shift in her chest, not confidence exactly, maar resolution, awareness that she would attend wedding not as Victor intended maar as herself, complete and undiminished by circumstances that were economic maar were not essential, that defined her material existence maar did not define her humanity, her dignity, her worth as person, who had learned that sometimes smallest gestures carried largest meanings, that sometimes presence was form van resistance, that sometimes showing up was its own form van victory. Het landgoed in Laren beyond zich precies, waar zulke landgoederen zich altijd bevonden in Nederland, verscholen achter hoge hagen en ijzeren hekken die privacy claimden, maar ook exclusiviteit, op percelen die groot genoeg waren dat buren abstractions waren in plaats van actuele mensen, omringd door bomen die oud waren op een manier die generaties van wealth suggereerde, die communiceerde dat dit land had toebehoord aan families die wealth hadden geërfd in plaats van gecreëerd. Ook al was Victor's geld recent, was product van 20 jaar van agressieve acquisitie en development in plaats van centuries van compound interest. Het was 15:30 uur op een zaterdag in juni en het weer had gecoöpereerd met Victor's plannen op die manier die rijke mensen altijd leken te ervaren, Zon die warm was maar niet excessief, lucht die blauw was met precies genoeg decoratief clouds om photogenic te zijn. Een lichte breeze die vrouwens haar bewoog in manner dat was flattering, zonder being destructive tot carefully constructed hairstyles. Gasten arriveerden in steady stream, BMW's en Mercedes en hier en daar een Tesla, omdat environmental consciousness was nu ook een vorm van status signaling, en assembleerden op het gazon waar ceremony zou plaatsvinden, waar rijen van witte stoelen waren arranged met precision dat spook van professional event planners wiens fees waren substantial maar whose expertise was essential for creating impressie van effortless elegance. De gasten zelf waren uniform in hun diversity, wat betekende dat ze varied in superficial characteristics, maar waren fundamenteel homogeen in hun social class, in hun assumptions over what constituted normal life, in hun shared vocabulary van references tot restaurants en vacation destinations en cultural events, that were accessible alleen tot people wiens discretionary income was measured in tens of thousands rather than hundreds. Ze droegen designer clothing. Dat was recognizable to those who knew, maar dat was subtle genoeg om te suggest dat wearer was secure genoeg om niet te need obvious logos, carried handbags en wore watches, dat kost meer dan Rosa's annual income, spoke in tones that were modulated om to project confidence zonder arrogance, competence zonder effort. Victor beyond siege by entrance tot ceremony area, greeting arriving guests met that practiced warmth that successful people develop, that balanced us in genuine friendliness and social performance, that makes each person feel momentarily special without actually committing to deeper engagement. Hij was 45 nu, had aged in manner that was favorable for men van his demographic, grayer temples that was distinguished rather than aging, body that was maintained door personal trainer, maar that also carried slight thickness that suggested prosperity, face that had lines maar not too many, not in places that would suggest worry of hardship. Hij droeg tuxedo that was custom-made, fit perfectly in manner that off-the-rack clothing never could, projected success without needing to verbalize it. Naast hem stood Isabel Vermeulen, zijn bride-to-be, wiens presence was itself a form van communication over Victor's status. Ze was 28, had career as influencer, that was built on cultivating image van aspirational lifestyle, had Instagram following in hundreds of thousands, die consumed carefully curated content van her travels, her fashion choices, her relationship met Victor that was presented as modern fairy tale, as validation that beauty and strategic self-presentation could translate to material security, tot access tot world van wealth that most van haar followers could only experience vicariously, door her posts. Het was 15 voor 7 uur. Ceremony was scheduled om te begin at 16:00, when black limousine appeared at entrance tot estate. Not unusual exactly, that some guests arrived in hired cars, maar something about this particular vehicle's arrival created ripple van attention, caused conversations tot pause mid-sentence, caused heads tot turn in direction van entrance, waar limousine was gliding tot stop met that smooth deceleration that expensive vehicles achieve. That suggests mechanical perfection, that communicates attention tot detail in engineering, that most people never consciously register, maar that subconsciously reinforces impressions van quality, van luxury, van difference tussen ordinary and extraordinary. Chauffeur emerged, professional, uniformed, and walked rond tot passenger side, opened door met gesture that was practiced, that had been performed thousands van times, maar that never lost its quality van ceremony, van ritual that marked transition from one space tot another, from private tot public, from anonymous tot observed. Rosa stepped out first, and collective intake van breath was audible in manner that would have been comical if it wasn't also testament tot how thoroughly audience had been prepared to see her as diminished, as evidence van Victor's superiority, as contrast that would make his current life shine brighter. But Rosa that emerged from limousine was not person, that Victor's narrative had suggested, was not wearing apologetic shabbiness of someone defeated door circumstance, was not performing gratitude for being included in celebration van life that had excluded her. Instead, ze droeg evening gown that was elegant zonder being ostentatious, that was clearly expensive, though in fact was borrowed van designer that Rosa had provided with flowers for years, that had wanted tot reciprocate kindness that had been consistent, that had meant more than money because it had been offered without expectation van return, in deep blue that complemented her coloring, that fit perfectly, that it had been altered specifically for this occasion, that transformed Haar from person. That guests had been prepared tot pity, tot presence that commanded attention, that disrupted narrative that had been constructed around her. Maar that was not most shocking element. Behind Rosa, emerging from limousine in sequence, that had been rehearsed maar that appeared natural, came three young men carrying violin cases, dressed in formal attire that matched ceremony's dress code. Wien's faces carried mixture van excitement and nervousness that suggested they understood significance van this moment, even if they couldn't fully articulate what its significance was. The viooltrio assembled quickly, efficiently, opened their cases and extracted instruments that gleamed in afternoon sunlight, and tuned without announcement, without permission, without acknowledgement that this was deviation from planned program, they began tot play. Not loudly, not aggressively, maar met volume that carried across lawn, that filled space between assembled guests, that created acoustic environment that was impossible tot ignore, that demanded attention not through force, maar through beauty, through technical proficiency that was evident even to those without musical training, through emotional resonance van Bach partita that one van students had suggested, because it carried gravitas without being mournful, carried complexity without being inaccessible. Victor, standing at entrance tot ceremony area, met Isabel on his arm, froze. His face cycled through expressions the rapid tot individually catalogue, maar that cumulatively communicated shock, confusion, anger, fear. Fear not van physical threat, maar van narrative disruption, van losing control over story that he had constructed, van having his performance upstaged not door someone wealthier of more powerful, maar door someone he had intended to marginalize, tot use as prop in his demonstration, van his own success. Gaston turned from Victor and Isabel tot Rosa and Haar trio, their attention captured not just door novelty, maar door something deeper, recognition perhaps that they were witnessing not scripted performance, maar authentic moment, something real in context that was otherwise carefully managed at point van artificiality, something human in space that had been designed to project perfection. Rosa walked forward, not toward Victor maar toward ceremony area, moved through assembled guests' Wien's faces, registered shock, admiration, confusion, curiosity, moved met posture that was upright zonder being defensive, that was graceful, zonder being performative, that communicated simply, Ik ben hier, I exist, I have worth that is not diminished, door your expectations of my diminishment. And music followed her, carried door three young men. Wien's gratitude was expressed, not in words, maar in performance, in offering van their talent in service van woman that had offered them support when they needed it, who had recognized their potential, when others had seen only their poverty, who had given without expectation van return and who was now receiving not as charity, maar as recognition, as acknowledgement, van reciprocal relationship that had been built over years, van small acts, van kindness that had accumulated tot significance, that was undeniable in this moment. Victor's plan tot humiliate his ex-wife had collapsed, neat gradually, maar instantaneously, had been transformed from weapon tot mirror, reflected back not Rosa's poverty, maar his own, not her diminishment, maar his own spiritual bankruptcy, his inability to recognize that some forms van wealth could not be purchased, could only be earned through consistent attention to others' humanity, through recognition that dignity was not contingent on economic status, through understanding that true generosity left giver richer rather than poorer. Het diner beyond zich in een tent die was erected op het gazon, een structuur die temporeel was, maar die was transformed door lighting en fabric tot space, die voelde permanent, die felt more curated than many actual buildings, waarin elke detail was considered. De manier waarop chandeliers hung at precise heights om te cast flattering light, zonder being obstructive, the arrangement van tables die allowed for both intimacy and visibility, the floral centerpieces die Rosa recognized immediately as work van high-end florist. Wien's prices were 10 times what the town charged. Wien's aesthetic was impeccable, maar was also, I thought privately, somewhat soulless in its perfection, lacking die small irregularities that made arrangements feel alive rather than constructed. Victor found Rosa during what was supposed to be cocktail hour, maneuvered her away when other guests met gesture that appeared casual, maar was clearly intentional, was product van planning rather than spontaneity. Hij led her tot side area, waar temporary bar had been set up, waar bartenders in white jackets prepared elaborate drinks that guests ordered by name, Negronis, old fashions, specialty cocktails that had been designed specifically for this event, and that had names that were playful references tot Victor and Isabel's relationship, that were meant om to be charming, maar dat struck Rosa as slightly desperate, as trying too hard to create narrative van uniqueness in context, waarin everything was actually quite conventional. Rosa. Victor's voice carried mixture van emotions that I was clearly struggling to control. Anger, certainly, maar also confusion, maybe fear, definitely wounded pride. What? Who heb je? I gestured vaguely, encompassing limousine, gown, trio, entire performance that had disrupted his careful staging. Rosa looked at him with expression that was calm, that betrayed none van internal satisfaction, that I felt at having destabilized his narrative, at having reclaimed agency in space wherein hij had intended haar to be passive, to be diminished. Ik heb geen geld nodig mensen te inspireren, Victor, zij said, her voice carrying that particular quality van certainty that comes not from arrogance, maar from lived experience, from understanding earned through years van practice. Alleen menselijkheid. Victor's face showed that I didn't understand, that deze answer was not sufficient, was not explanation, maar was instead riddle, was deflection rather than engagement. Hij opened his mouth to continue questioning, maar Rosa raised hand in gesture that was gentle maar absolute, that communicated that zij would explain on her terms rather than his, that this conversation would unfold according to her rhythm, rather than being interrogation waarin hij extracted information through pressure. Na onze scheiding, zij began, haar gaze not on Victor maar beyond him, looking out at assembled guests wiens lives were so comfortable, so insulated from struggles, that most people experience daily. Ik did what ik always had wanted to do maar never had time for during ons marriage. Ik volunteered. At community center in Oost, working met young people die had talent maar geen resources. Die wanted to learn instruments maar wiens families couldn't afford, lessons of rental fees. We were being told implicitly and sometimes explicitly that classical music was not for them, was not accessible to people from their backgrounds, their neighborhoods, their economic circumstances. Z turned her gaze back to Victor, saw that I was listening now, that his earlier anger was being replaced by something more complex, something that might be recognition, might be discomfort at having his assumptions challenged, at having world revealed as more complicated than binary that I had constructed, wherein people were either successful or failed, wherein wealth was evidence, van virtue and poverty was evidence van inadequacy. Die three young men, Rosa continued, gesturing toward where trio was now seated at table. Eating dinner met evident enjoyment, clearly unused tot food van this quality, this presentation. Ze waren among eerste students that ik helped. It gave them flowers for free wheneer they performed at small venues, helped them prepare applications for conservatory, wrote recommendations, attended their concerts wheneer they had no family that could come, offered encouragement wheneer they doubted themselves, wheneer system told them repeatedly that they didn't belong, that classical music was not for peoples als them. Victor swallowed, his throat moving in manner that betrayed emotion that I was trying to suppress. Gaan de limousine, de jerk. His voice was quieter now, was less accusatory, was more genuinely curious. Father van one van students owned small transportation company. Wanneer I heard about wedding, omdat natuurlijk I told them, omdat transparency is part van authentic relationships rather than manipulation, I insisted on providing limousine. The jurk is borrowed from designer that I've worked with for years, providing flowers for her shows, her events, building relationship that was based on mutual respect rather than transaction. Zij altered it specifically for today, wanted to help, that, Rosa paused, considered how to articulate what was fundamental, but was also difficult to express without sounding self-congratulatory, without claiming virtue in manner that would undermine actual virtue being described. That apparently people remember kindness, Victor. Remember when someone sees them as human, rather than as means tot end, as person rather than as resource to be exploited. The words hung between them, were not accusation exactly, maar were certainly indictment, were mirror that reflected back tot Victor not just his treatment van Rosa, maar his entire approach tot relationships, tot life, tot measuring worth in terms that were purely material, that ignored everything, that couldn't be quantified in financial statements, that couldn't be displayed in Instagram posts, that couldn't be used the signal status tot others wiens approval I craved with intensity, that was inversely proportional to the amount that I claimed to not care what others thought. From nearby table, Isabel watched this conversation with expression that was shifting from irritation to something deeper, something that resembled recognition, that was unwelcome, that threatened foundation van relationship that zij had constructed with Victor, that had been based on assumptions about what mattered, about what constituted successful life, about what deserved respect, in admiration. Zij saw way that Victor looked at Rosa, not with desire exactly, maar with something that was perhaps more threatening, respect, recognition van quality that I had failed to appreciate when zij were married, that I had dismissed as irrelevant because it didn't translate to economic productivity, to social capital, to things that I valued because his world valued them. Rosa placed hand briefly on Victor's arm, gesture that was not intimate maar was compassionate, was acknowledgement that I too was human, was struggling in ways that wealth couldn't resolve, was trapped in system van values that had given him much maar, had also taken something essential, something that zij had managed to preserve despite her poverty, of perhaps because van it. Ik hoop, zij said softly, dat je ooit leert wat liefde echt is. Niet deze. Zij gestured at tent, at elaborate decorations, at performance van perfection that surrounded them. Façade. Die avond had zich getransformeerd tot die specifieke fase van wedding receptions, waarin initial formality had dissolved into something looser, waarin alcohol had lowered inhibitions genoeg that conversations became more animated, wherein dancing had begun in manner that was initially self-conscious, maar was gradually becoming more abandoned, wherein die carefully maintained facades van social propriety were beginning to crack in ways that were both liberating and slightly uncomfortable for those. Ween's identity was heavily invested in maintaining appearance van control. Rosa beyond zich in de tuin, niet de manicured formal garden waar ceremony had taken place, maar smaller, meer intiem space achter tent, waarin old rose bushes grew in manner that suggested they had been here long voordat landgoed had been acquired by current owners, wherein stone bench sat beneath willow tree Ween's branches, created natural curtain that separated this space from rest van property, that offered privacy, zoned a complete isolation, that was perfect for reflection, for moments wherein retreat was necessary, maar wherein complete withdrawal would be noticed, would be interpreted as social failure. Ze sat with hands folded in lap, evening gown pooling round Haar in manner that was elegant maar also practical, that suggested she understood how taught occupy space with grace, how taught be still without being passive, how taught exist in moment zonde needing taught, fill it met activity of distraction. The violin trio had finished their performance half-hour earlier, had been absorbed into party where guests had treated them with mixture van curiosity on condescension, had asked questions that were ostensibly interested, maar that carried undertones van class assumptions, van beliefs about who belonged in spaces zoals days, and we was temporarily admitted, maar fundamentally remained outsider. Victor found Haar here, appeared at edge van garden space met movement that was hesitant, that lacked die confident stride that characterized his usual physical presence. I had loosened bow tie, had removed tuxedo jacket, had that slightly disheveled appearance that happens to men at end van long formal events, when a carefully constructed image begins to deteriorate, when a human beneath costume becomes visible despite best efforts to maintain performance. Rosa. I said her name zoals question, zoals request for permission to enter space that she had claimed, to join her in moment that was clearly intended to be private. When she didn't object, didn't gesture him away, Hige moved forward, sat on bench beside Haar maar maintained distance that was respectful, that acknowledged boundaries that had been established, not through words, maar through years van separation, through divorce that had been legal maar also emotional, through process van disentanglement that had been painful maar also necessary. Silence stretched between them, was filled alleen door distant sounds van party, by rustle van willow branches in evening breeze, by occasional burst van laughter that carried from tent. Victor opened mouth several times as if tot speak, closed it again, clearly struggling. Tot find words that would be adequate tot moment, that would express something that was complex, that was mixture van apology and recognition, and maybe also grief for what had been lost, for opportunities that had been squandered, for version van himself that I might have been, if I had made different choices, had valued different things. Ik wilde, hij began, stopped, tried again. Toen ik je uitnodigde, ik dacht, ik wilde dat je zou zien wat je had verloren, wilde dat je zou voelen. Hij paused, seemed to realize that completing that sentence would require admitting something about himself that was uncomfortable, that would reveal cruelty that was not accidental maar intentional, that was product van wounded pride that sought tot wound in return. Rosa turned to look at him, her face illuminated by soft light that filtered through willow branches, by distant glow from tent. "Je hoeft niets tot zeggen," she said, her voice carrying gentleness that was not weakness, maar was strength, was capacity for compassion that extended even to those who had caused harm, that recognized that hurt people, that cycles van pain were perpetuated through inability to break them, through refusal to choose differently. Wat wij waren is voorbij. Jouw leven draait om macht, het mijne draait om mensen. The simplicity van distinction was devastating in its accuracy, was reduction van complex relationship, taught its essential truth, taught fundamental difference in values that had made their marriage unsustainable, that had created distance that couldn't be bridged by compromise because it was neat about specific disagreements, maar about entire orientation toward world, toward what mattered, toward what constituted life well lived. Movement at Edge Van Garden interrupted them, Isabel appearing with expression that was complex mixture, van anger and something else, something that looked like fear, like recognition that her position was not as secure as she had believed, that Victor's attention toward his ex-wife was not casual nostalgia, maar was something deeper, was engagement with questions about meaning on value, that their relationship carefully avoided, that existed in space that Isabel couldn't enter because she had built her identity around performance van image, rather than cultivation van substance. Wat gebeurt hier? Isabel's voice was sharp, was pitched tot Carrie not alleen tot Victor and Rosa, maar tot anyone binnen earshot, was calculated tot create scene, tot force, Victor tot choose publicly, tot demonstrate loyalty in manner that would be visible, that would be documented in photos that guests were surely taking, that would later appear on social media as evidence van drama, van conflict, van failure, van Victor's carefully staged celebration, tot maintain its illusion, van perfection. Rosa stood, smoothed her gown with gesture that was automatic, that spoke van ingrained habit van presenting oneself with dignity, regardless van circumstances. She placed hand briefly on Victor's shoulder, not possessively, not romantically, maar compassionately, as one human touching another in moment van difficulty offering comfort. That was simple, that asked nothing in return. "Ik hoop dat je ooit leert wat liefde echt is," she said, her words directed tot Victor, maar also tot Isabel, tot assembled universe van people who measured worth in followers and likes and material possessions. Niet deze façade. She walked away then, moving through garden toward exit, her posture upright, her pace measured, refusing tot rush, refusing tot perform embarrassment of defeat. The violin trio, seeing her movement, gathered their instruments and followed, creating procession that was dignified, that was complete unto itself, that needed no audience, but that was witnessed anyway by guests who had gravitated toward garden when Isabel's raised voice had signaled drama, who now stood silent as Rosa departed, as she claimed exit on her terms rather than being dismissed, as she transformed what was intended tot be humiliation into demonstration van grace under pressure, van capacity to maintain dignity when systems and people conspired to strip it away. Next day, photos appeared online. Not official wedding photos that Victor's photographer had captured, maar candid shots from guests, video clips that had been recorded on phones, images van Rosa's arrival, van Trio's performance, van her elegant departure that contrasted so sharply with Isabel's angry confrontation. A narrative that emerged was not one that Victor had intended, was not story van his triumph and Rosa's diminishment, maar was instead recognition that sometimes poverty is material, maar wealth is spiritual, that sometimes people who have least in terms van money have most in terms van character, that sometimes those we dismiss as irrelevant are actually embodying values that we claim to hold maar fail to practice. Victor, watching these unfold from his honeymoon suite, understood too late what I had lost not when divorce was finalized maar years before, when I had stopped seeing Rosa as partner and had begun seeing her as obstacle tot ambitions that required singular focus that couldn't accommodate someone. Ween's priorities were different. Ween's definition van success wasn't compatible with his own. I had married Isabel believing that shared values around image and status would create foundation for relationship, maar Rosa's presence at wedding had revealed hollowness at center van that construction, had shown that what I had dismissed as irrelevant was actually essential, was what made life meaningful rather than merely successful in eyes van others. Ween's opinions shouldn't have mattered maar somehow did, whose approval hij sought with desperation, that was inversely proportional tot. Amount that hij claimed independence from their judgment. Rosa returning tot haar small apartment in Noord, removing borrowed gown, placing it carefully in garment bag tot return tot designer who had been so generous, felt liberation that was physical, that was lightness in chest, that had been constricted for years, that came from finally releasing need for Victor's recognition, from understanding that his approval of disapproval was irrelevant tot her worth, that she was complete regardless van his judgment, that her life with its material limitations was also life with richness that he couldn't access, couldn't purchase, couldn't even fully comprehend, because hij had organized his entire existence around avoiding precisely die vulnerability, die dependence on others, die recognition van interdependence that characterized her relationships, that made her poor in money, maar rich in connections, that were authentic, that were reciprocal, that were based on mutual recognition van shared humanity, rather than strategic calculation van mutual utility. Raakte dit verhaal je? Abonneer je op mijn kanaal en laat een like achter voor meer verhalen over waardigheid, onverwachte kracht en transformatie.